It's a new federal act. It's known as FinCEN. They're the ones that put out the geographic targeting order where, if you're doing a cash deal, 300,000 or more for residential, you've got to disclose who the parties are involved. They're trying to avoid anonymity. The goal is to reduce money laundering and find out who's involved. What it says is every legal entity, LLCs, corporations, partnerships, trusts, well, for every one of those, you now need to file this beneficial ownership information report.
Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Shawcross. With me, as always, is Mark Ainley. Mark, good to be back. How you doing?
Good to be back, man. How was your trip? You went to your brother's wedding or something, right? Denver?
Yeah, I was out in Denver and Boulder, and it was 90 during the day, 40 at night. It was awesome out there. Had a great time.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Is your older brother?
I am the eldest. This is my middle brother.
Okay, gotcha.
So he moved out to Denver 7-8 years ago and met a girl from Libertyville.
Oh,
so
it's
funny how that works.
So when you go travel like that, do you pull up housing prices at different cities? Like, do you do like?
I did yes, it intrigues me, and this again brings me back to how much I love Chicago. You drive from the airport out there, you see like new subdivision, and you see cranes in the air for the one next to it, and you see all this open land. It's like, man, they're just gonna keep building, and it's gonna keep hurting, right? Like supply can keep going up over there. There's so much opportunity, and I don't know, and it's just a bunch of frame stuff built in the last 10 years. So, beautiful area. Like I could absolutely see why people live there. It's awesome. Like just the mountain backgrounds and all the different opportunities to be outdoors. But from a housing standpoint, like the housing stock just does not compare, right? Like to what we got here.
Whenever I travel, whether, I went to Destin, Florida, like I spent, I probably spent 6 mental hours figuring out how I could buy an Airbnb down there or build one or when I was When I was in Salt Lake City, I'm like, what can I buy here? Like I spend a lot of time just kind of going through the mental exercise of investing wherever I'm at.
Yeah, like the Airbnb we're at, like, okay, they're making this amount. Okay,
yeah.
You start doing the math of like,
when I went to Green Bay, I'm like, $1,000 a night. I could buy a duplex if I had 2 duplexes. Like, but what about the offseason? Like, yeah, you start running all those numbers mentally.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how that works. So, no, good time and good to be back. So, we had a good episode here. Well, this is we're going to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act, which I'm going to assume 99% of our listeners know nothing about, and it's about to hit us. And, maybe not the sexiest topic, but man, like this is something could hold up your refi, could hold up your sale, like something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, for sure. And you got to listen to it and you got to follow this. So if anything, there is an action step coming from this episode. And the thing is, it's not a hard step. I know a year from now, we're going to hear people getting screwed about it over it. And it ends up being probably a less than half-hour type thing that you actually just have to go through and do for each one of your entities. So stay tuned to the end and make sure you follow the links in the show notes to go and actually have your to-do to complete.
Yeah. All right. What's our housing provider tip of the week?
So housing provider tip of the week, right now we're recording this. It's beginning of October. We've had a late, it's been warm all the way up until, this week, even still as we're recording, which means the leaves haven't fallen. And I see a lot of people, a lot of investors are starting to do their fall cleanups and they're cleaning their gutters and all that stuff. And it's not time yet because it's been warm longer. That means the leaves aren't falling faster, which I believe is ultimately one of your problems for want to do that fall cleanup. So you might be doing your fall cleanup this year in beginning of December, just because the weather's been so warm so long. So don't jump out ahead of that. I know I see people right now, they're gonna have to either A, go back and do it again, or B, they're not going to do it and they're going to have an issue with backed up ice damming or leaves covering their drain pipes or whatnot.
Got it. So today's housing provider tip is to procrastinate. You get rewarded for procrastination.
Yep. You get permission to procrastinate this time.
So, all right. Today's guest, I've known for several years. An attorney runs the Erwin law firm, which I believe he's been doing for decades now. At Drexel, we use them for evictions. So shout out to Zeke McDonald Lewis. Just done a terrific job over there. A member of the NSBC, actually a board member of the NSBC, heavily involved in the community. Just a ton of knowledge. We could have talked for hours on a lot of these different topics. So without further ado, Jim Erwin, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks. Good to be here.
We're excited to have you. So it took us a while. You and I have known each other for years here from having a few beers at NSBC events. So glad to finally get you on the show.
Likewise, likewise. Always enjoy listening to your show. So it's an honor, a pleasure to be with you guys this morning.
So Jim, you've been around real estate for a few decades here. Just let's start at the very beginning. Like, how did you get involved? Like, why this path?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been doing this now for coming up on 32 years. And the honest to goodness truth is, I wouldn't recommend this for folks in terms of my path, but I kind of fell into it, if you will, sort of as a combination of interests. Initially coming out of college, I thought I was going to go on to business school and wound up sort of changing my mind, and I went on to law school straight out of college. And, first generation through college, first generation certainly into law school. So I didn't have a whole lot of the guidance that I now try to pass on to young students starting out. But in law school, it was more about figuring out law, getting through it. So coming out of it, as so many of us, we really don't know what we're going to be doing as lawyers. But I did have an interest in both business and real estate, and kind of really the business of real estate. At the time, I directly owned a couple of properties. So real estate as an interest was the first area of practice I started in, and, started with residential real estate transactions largely. Through that, in the mid 90s, it grew into representing condominium associations a lot, as a lot of people who had bought into new projects were asking me to, hey, take a look at our declaration and bylaws, help us figure out how we're supposed to be running this place, so forth and so on. Also in mid 90s to the early 2000s, up until the crisis of the mid 2000s, we represented a lot of the small condominium conversion developers here on the north side. That was a big chunk of our business. Of course, a lot of that went away. But those were the early stages. The firm now has evolved into three practice areas, and real estate, estate planning, and business. And we do transactions and litigation in all of those areas. And it's because of who the real estate investor is. Largely, it was driven by our real estate practice. A lot of these folks were coming back to us asking, hey, how do I pass this on to my kids? How do I protect these assets? How do I better set this up so that I'm protected? Things like that. So that's how it's grown.
That sounds horribly like not that crazy exciting. But what did Jim, as an 8-year-old, like curious boy, want to be when he grew up?
I had no idea. So what was different about my start in the practice, what related to my childhood. I grew up in a family business. My dad had started a company back in the 50s that was a nut and bolt distributor. So very different from the practice of law, clearly. That was my life. In fact, up until I owned that company and ran that side by side with my law practice through 2010.
Oh, wow.
When I sold it, my dad passed away in 98, and I ran it from that point forward completely. But I grew up in the company. So that was the aspect of small business that drove me. And so that's why I say my route was a little bit different, in that the startup of my practice was kind of almost a side business, if you will. And it wasn't until 2000 that I, decided, okay, I'm going to do, law practice kind of full time, and slowly wean down to where I sold off the family business. But, as an 8-year-old, as an 18-year-old, I had no idea what I wanted to do. For me, the practice of law has just fits with who I am, I think. And that's kind of our firm it's just a culture of helping people. I enjoy that the most.
That's awesome. It's funny you said about the condo conversions. I spent the first half of my career getting in around 2000 with condo conversions, and then the second half of my career was condo deconversion. So like it totally, like the 2 decades, like the big decades for condos, like I was on both sides of that.
But
Yeah,
I want to hit on that too, because we've talked about condo conversions and deconversions, but from a legal perspective, let's take a little side route here. You got a 6-unit building, a 4-unit building, whatever. For whatever reason, the best use of that is now condos. You've had it as apartments. What is like legally? What do you have to do? You have to separate the pins. Like, just give us the high level. What does that
yeah,
investor have to do if he wants to transform his 4-unit corner building into 4 condos?
sure. Yeah, so going from apartments to condos, you basically have to submit the property. I mean, it's the same in reverse in concept. It's just that the paperwork and the process can be longer. You submit the property to the Condominium Property Act of Illinois, right? And to do that, you have to draft a declaration and bylaws. You have to draft the underlying documentation that legally submits it to it, right? On the practical end, what that does is when you submit that paperwork to the county, that begins the process of splitting the pins. So they go and follow that declaration and your survey, and they then assign new pins, and generally takes about a year and a half, depending on the timing in the year, to issue these new pins to each of the condominium units, designates common elements and so forth and so on. But from the very beginning, for a developer to do it correctly, and I say to do it correctly because it's, there are a lot of shortcuts, but really you're supposed to be starting with a property report, which gets submitted to the city. And that property report identifies all of the team members involved, the architects, the engineers, the developer, the sponsor, the legal team, whomever, your marketing team, and also identifies the project, what the engineers' reports have indicated. A lot, you'd be surprised to find, especially on the small condo conversion end, how many of these developers they completely skip the property report part, but it is what it is. Key thing about the property report as well, though, is it can have important budget information, which, especially back in the heyday of just hundreds of these, everybody was converting everything. And, when you're selling a property and it's non-conforming basement, well, they were taking the same thing and just taking that non-conforming basement apartment and calling it a unit, but it never showed up on any of the docs, So it was kind of the wild, wild west. But I was telling these people, you've got to understand that this, preparing a good property report also protects you, the developer, when, someone says you didn't do you were negligent in constructing this project. You can say, well, use best information available and so forth and so on. But that's essentially the process. You get the declaration, you prepare a purchase and sale agreement that every buyer should use. You don't start with the standard residential real estate contracts that are typically used. You want your own, because it involves issues of what warranties are available. A developer always should be using their own limited warranty form and cutting off what we call the general Illinois implied warranty of habitability. Real key legal things that are just different in that world. So that's all in the front end. Then you go, you sell, you turn them over. Once you get to either 2 years from the point of having first recorded your declaration, or you've sold 75% of your units, then you, as the developer, turn the association over to the unit owners, and they now manage their own property, and it goes from there.
It's a lot of paperwork. I know a lot of our listeners understand the kind of the rehab part, and they understand probably the sale part. As far as the legal side of that, what's like the range, like something that costs for maybe Tom's example, a 4-unit? Is this a $1,000 thing? Or is this a $20,000? Where does that sit?
No, it's probably more. It's much closer to the 20,000 range. It depends on the project, depends on how much, we're going to need to pull work. But with the survey included, legal work, up to the point of sale, because when it comes to the point of sale, then we take a small fee on the sale end. But of course, the title policy is what's, providing some of the compensation back to us. But up until that point, for a 4-unit, we probably are looking at, with the survey, right around 18,000, something like that, maybe 15,000.
Now, is pricing like that, is that if you had an 8-unit, it'd be twice as much, or is that kind of a per unit, or is it more
No, it is based on the size of the project. For us, at least, our fee scale is based on the size of the project, but it's not exponential, right? So we have groupings, and it's just based on experience, how much that is involved. But the work, going from, say, a 5-unit project to a 50-unit project,
you're not 10x
maybe,
pricing.
maybe you're double there.
Now that's so much more complicated. And what shocked me is we did one of our strategies during the downturn was buying up these condos in the 4, 6, 8. We did as big as an 18-unit building and deconverting it back to apartment complex. The process for that was crazy easy, just removing it from the Condo Act. Like,
exactly. Right.
Talk to us a little bit about that process.
Right. So it's interesting because I have a client right now who had me go through the whole conversion process to condos and then decided to sell the building. So I just recorded the declaration a couple of weeks ago, and I have to now quickly submit a removal declaration. But you're right. That's really legally all that's involved. Now, if you have existing owners, let's say that it's a long-established condominium association, the filing of the removal is the simple part. Especially here in Chicago, the difficult part is getting 85% ownership approval or more, because it's no longer developer controlled. So you have to get 85% or more of the more than 85% of the unit owners to, by percentage interest, to approve the deconversion, the sale essentially of the property to somebody who wants to deconvert it. And very often the way, I'm sure everyone's seen this, it works is someone who targets a building starts buying units as much as they can to get as large a foothold in the voting percentage as possible. But that's where the challenge really lies, is getting past that legal hurdle, getting enough people to support it because of the cost, because of what they're going to get back on their renovations. If somebody had just finished a renovation, let's say, and improved their value more than others in the building, all of that, passing that legal threshold is what's challenging. The removal is a very simple filing.
The issue it was always easy for, like we're just explaining, we own most of the units, or if not all of them, every time. So that was easy. It was going to the bank, because the bank has to, if I recall, the bank has to sign off on that declaration as well too. And the bank just didn't know what to do. They're like, all right, we know you're good here, but we're not sure how this works with, we had an issue with CIC with that. And I think First Eagle, like, we ran into it a couple of times of them just not knowing what to do. And can we sign this? Can we not sign this? Who has to approve this? Do we have to change your loan? Like, that was our obstacle.
Well, it's interesting because, you're right. And that's another shortcut that some folks have taken. I just sent my client a removal, and they were like, I've got to have the bank sign this. I'm like, just like you have to have the bank sign that consent the mortgagee to convert it to condos, you have to have it the other way. And, I wasn't around in the 60s and early 70s when the condo structure really took hold here and really, really became popular. But I heard it was the same challenge with financing, is, runs everything. You got to get your bank to approve. And if you can't get them to understand the structure and how that's going to affect them, that you do have an issue. So yeah, you're right. You do have to get the consent on that declaration. You have to show that all the lien holders have approved it. And, really it's getting them comfortable with the fact that, okay, over X period of time, they've still got security. How? If they underwrote it as a condo building, initially as a whole condo building, they may need to restructure their paperwork to get assignment of leases and things like that, other security forms. But largely, I think these days they're coming to grips with it.
Yep. So good stuff there. And for our investors interested in deconversions, we had Sean Connolly on episode 128 to talk about it from the investor side and underwriting. And then also we had a Tuesday tip with Jake Parker and Andy Friedman from Kaiser, which was episode 135. So if it's a topic that's interesting to you, go back to those. All right. So Jim, you were all over LinkedIn the past 12 months. I feel like you were a part of like 50 transactions on the South side here. You had some investors really just going gangbusters. Can you
Yeah.
just give us a little bit of the oral history? Because everyone out here has been saying, hey, inventory is tough, inventory is tough. And you know, part of a group here that was very, very active. So maybe just talk a little about their strategy. And then you, as the attorney, like what role did you play, especially on these bigger deals? Because a lot of our listeners probably aren't
Sure.
used to just how involved an attorney can be in, you know, the sale, the buy and sell of a 60 unit courtyard building.
Sure. So, you know, we were fortunate to meet with this first group of investors back in, I want to say 2020 or so. And, you know, they told us they're not Chicago based, mostly out of New York. But we also have some investors out of California, another one Midwest, but they were looking at the Chicago market as a very profitable market, one where there were still very good opportunities. And I think that's something that, you know, most folks that are really in the real estate industry here understand and know and appreciate that Chicago is really a great market. Very good returns, very affordable on the whole, both on the investor end and for our consumers that we're serving. People just don't get that. But in any event, they were targeting the South Shore because it was a very well established, very good building structures, you know, a lot of good bones, if you will, there, and good tenant history for the most part, and yet quite affordable. I mean, when they started targeting it, you know, one of the big reasons was they were getting these larger buildings, 50 plus units, at as low as 75, 70 a door, you know. So that's a good start. That's a good start. The challenges, of course, especially for those, you know, what I've had to try to push a lot of these groups to do is to make sure that they have good property management boots on the ground here in Chicago, somebody that knows how to handle things here, that is local, that isn't trying to manage from afar. You can get into problems real quickly, as all of our listeners know, right? All of you listeners have had their experiences with this, whether it be simple trash violations that just become nauseatingly annoying. You know, you got to have a mechanism for dealing with that. Starting with the property manager knows that they can reach out to us. I mean, a lot of our involvement, and it's partly because of how our firm is structured, but a lot of our involvement with these folks, our clients, extends well beyond the purchase deal. We close, but we are there as their counsel for everything from the little trash things to violations to dealing with housing discrimination claims, whether they're filed by the state or whether they're filed federally. You know, we step in and defend them, guide them on how to avoid these things, how to keep better records in order to be prepared for such a claim. You know, so you know, the attraction for them is essentially the numbers, right? As an investment, the challenge is understanding the dynamics of a lot of it. I mean, with a lot of those, you have to understand the process of the what do you call it? Voucher supported tenants, how those, you know, a CHA process, how to make sure that you try to do the best you can to collect. I mean, with CHA, it's very difficult on the transition, making sure that either you have something in place where the seller transfers over any collections that they make post-closing, or that you have some kind of mechanism for figuring out where those rents have gone. That's, you know, a big difference between, say, that product and product elsewhere in the city that may not have those issues.
Oh man, yeah, we're writing. We're gonna do an episode of 5 ways Southside investors get screwed, and one of them is obviously management, and I only think we're a management company. So on behalf of management companies, but I only think a lot of them do it on purpose. It might be unprepared or whatnot, but we did a study many years ago. Now we took a 2-flat in Lincoln Park and a 2-flat in South Shore, and it was 8.31 touches of South Shore to the 1 touch of the Lincoln Park. Like the amount of touches you have to have and actual service is so much higher. And then you take that, extrapolate that across a multi-unit building that now has the kind of cross tenant issues versus even like a 2-flat. Like the amount of touches is just sick. And so many property managers, 1, underestimate manpower, and then 2, underestimate really the scope of work that they're up against across their portfolio. Just because they have some good days doesn't mean that they're prepared.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about violations for a little bit, because I get asked that one a lot. Like, hey, you take over buildings with violations. The process for getting those removed, right? I know it's a little bit different every time, but just at a high level, I'm buying a building with violations. It's masonry, porches, whatever it is. I'm walking in with the intent to fix it up, but just talk about that process with the city and actually like getting it cleared out.
Yeah. So, and it's a challenge both from the acquisition stage and the ownership stage at post-acquisition, right?
Correct. Yeah, just to be clear, a lot of traditional lenders don't want to touch something with violations on it, right? So you have to go to your private lenders, hard money, whatever it may be. Like, just know that off the bat there, you're walking in with, with minimal options.
Although with a lot of these, in the last couple of years in particular, have been a lot of loan assumption deals. Yep. And so whether it's Freddie, Fannie, whomever, they have a process for dealing with those. And I'd like to think that we've gotten kind of good about figuring out how to satisfy the lender that is going to be, obviously we're talking, money's involved, right? You have to have certain holdbacks. You're not going to escape that if it's during the acquisition phase. But also our ability to get agreement with, because we've worked with the city so many times, because we know the folks in the building department, we know the strategic task force folks, we know the councils there. And I also like to think that we press our clients to act as transparently, as responsibly as possible. And we built a good rapport with those folks in the city, because what you have to do is you're going to have to get them to give you time. You're going to have to commit to making repairs. You're going to have to put the money aside for them, certainly with a lender, right? City isn't going to be talking about holdbacks. They want typically nothing to do with any of that. That's going to be on the lender end. So that's all through the acquisition phase, and we do have various types of agreements, and I think that's also why we have, built this specific piece of business over the last few years. The lenders have recognized that we are prepared to deal with this and get our clients across the finish line with these things, and then we deliver within the year, whatever it is that our client is supposed to get this done. It entails also being involved in the case. So we have a litigation team here that handles everything from evictions through these building court cases. And on the building court cases, it's, keeping after the client. Do we have photos? Do we have inspections set up? Do you know what's next? Have you got the proper documentation for it? Because if you start to deliver that regularly and responsibly to the city, they're really good about saying, okay, these guys I can trust, I'll work with. And so when we do have a slip up, whether something we haven't delivered on time or client, whatever, they cut us more slack.
Yeah, just to interrupt you real quick, in my experience, they've been very good. Hey, I pulled the permit. I'm actually going to do the work. Cool. Like the city's not banging down your door on these, and they usually give you the continuance. Right. Hey, I'm not gonna have the work done by this date. Cool. Here's another 2 months. Like, it's actually been compared to a lot of the field inspections, a very lenient process, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. Field inspections, that's just one that's super hard you get different inspectors saying different things, and they say one thing one day and the same guy will come out the next time, and and just scheduling them. I think one of you went off on that issue. It was Mark, but getting these inspections scheduled and the like. But again, if you have established that you're a responsible owner, that's all they want, really. Most of these folks in the city, they just want people owning these buildings that care.
It's so easy if you just go to Daily Center and sit through some other idiots up there. All you gotta be is just not them. Like that was like the first thing. Like I went to court one day. I'm like, all right, all I gotta do is just be better than those 12 idiots that went before me, and like and be respectable. Like you could do pretty much anything you want and get as many. Listen, I'm not bragging about this. We had a case go 3.5 years. Like no one ever pushed back. No one was ever mad. We just kept doing what we're supposed to do. It took 3.5 years. There's some money issues and all that stuff. But yeah, like it's just so easy, especially when they compare you being decent to all the other idiots that walk through that courtroom.
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of people, they didn't buy the building with violations. They are the ones owning it with violations on it, and then they're not taking care of it. Like that's where the city is focused. All right, here's someone who's buying the building. They're going to fix it. Okay, cool. Like follow through and be done.
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. Don't ignore them. Don't ignore them when they first contact you. Don't get ticked off. Oh, somebody called the city on me. It is what it is. This is the cost of doing business. If it's not something you're into, then you gotta switch up. But as long as you're responsive, when they tell you secure the place, get it secured. I mean, at a minimum, just get the fence up. Don't gripe about it. So that's a large piece of what we do is assist long distance clients in just appearing, making sure that before the court appearance, we've sent counsel an update so that they know, all right, here is the permit application. We expect it by X date. They know how the process works, so they know when you're lying and when you're not.
Being in court, whether it be Daily Center or Kangaroo Court, whatever you want to call it, experience, stuff like that, you realize fast how much power the city has to come strike down on you if they really want to. Bam, receivership. Absolutely. Like in a week's time. Like they could hurt you hard. And everything you just said, Jim, is so relevant to just like keep the communication open. Don't get mad. Whatever happened already happened. Like they have a lot of power, and you have to yield to that and do what you got to do at your point, however you ended up in this situation or not. So
yeah.
I want to this conversation you guys are talking about more of like active cases. And I don't know if it was you and me, Tom, were talking about this with somebody, but I get the question all the time around people going to buy a building and there's old violations on there. There's violations from 10, 12 years ago, and it might be stupid stuff. Like what's your advice around that for investors to how much to worry about, how much to, do you call that back to court to open up that can of worms? Like what's your feedback on that from an attorney's standpoint?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, with every building, we do a FOIA and we check the website, which is generally pretty up to date and pretty accurate. And when we see something, I mean, I say, my alarms aren't too trigger happy if it's more than 5 years old. A lot of these things get sort of cited, if you will, but no court action ever evolves from it. What I do say to investors looking at it is, okay, know that these were cited and take a look. Have your inspection make sure to look. Does it look like it was ever addressed or not? I think that a lot of the times in those situations, they haven't been addressed. So you just have to factor that in. Now, in loan assumptions, it's a little bit unique because the lender was probably already aware of them from the last time when they first, underwrote the project. And they may say, okay, those were never taken care of, which always kind of makes me, laugh a little bit. It's like, well, yeah, they weren't taken care of on your watch, and now you're going to make our butt.
Right.
You can't fight it if you're going to assume the loan. The benefit is the interest rate you're getting, right? So you factor that in. But in any event, a lot of times on those loan assumptions, they will ask that okay, we're going to need to set aside some money to see that these are taken care of. And the lending environment has gotten stricter and tighter than it was, say, even 10 years ago around these types of things. But even if it's not the lender, do I worry about city enforcement of those issues? Truthfully, no. And the conversation I have with some of my investor clients is, okay, look, are you planning on coming in here and doing anything from a value add? Or is this simply going to be a churn of the portfolio that's there? You're not really intending to make any difference. If you're not, then expect that you may get a city call on this, or what I often tell them is, if you have a fire there, all of those past violations are going to suddenly come out, whether in the news or the city, and they don't care at that point if someone's been injured or worse in that property. They're not going to care that it wasn't under your watch. They're only going to care that they were open and never satisfied, never resolved. So, that's the only thing I say. If you're coming in as a responsible owner and you're going to take care of fixing some of the things that need to be fixed, and thus increasing your rents, great. Then you will have no problem. A 10-year-old violation that was cited will not be an issue. And even if they did cite it, those are among the ones that we typically will go in, half-hour appearance, and it'll get dropped with no charges.
To your point, Jim, we saw the extreme worst case scenario of that play out with Roman when he had the explosion at his building. I forgot what episode that was, but when I mean, one of the things that helped him be strong and keep media and the city on his side while he was having the worst days of his life was the fact that he was on top of those building violations, and he had track records, he had documentation, he had all the stuff to support it.
Yeah. And we've seen the opposite. We've seen serial violators, and the city already knows that they are. They just haven't
gotten to it.
There's been no impetus to really drive after them. And then a fire, and killed a firefighter, for instance, a few years back. He died in battling that blaze, and the city came down hard and made that owner liquidate everything.
Is that the one on 72nd at that laundromat in South Shore? There was the bad one. I think
no, the one I'm referring to was on the south side, but it was more like in the Calumet area. Gotcha. Just one example, but yeah.
All right. So awesome stuff here. And Jim, I'm going to shift gears here. Last NSBC event we were at, you were telling me about the Corporate Transparency Act. And this is something I was completely unaware of. So I'm going to assume a lot of our listeners are also completely unaware of. So can you give us the 2-minute download here? What is the Corporate Transparency Act? Why should investors care about this? I'm excited to hear about this too, because I know a bunch of people on my team filled out a bunch of paperwork on my behalf and maybe signed a bunch of shit in the last couple of months, and I'm not even sure what it was. So take it away, Jim.
Yeah, so it's a new federal act. It's a part of the FinCEN, which is whatever financial crimes enforcement network or something like that. I don't know. It's known as FinCEN. They're the ones that put out the geographic targeting order where, if you're doing a cash deal, 300,000 or more for residential, you've got to disclose who the parties are involved, right? They're trying to avoid anonymity. Well, it's the same thing behind this Corporate Transparency Act. The goal is to reduce money laundering, to really get behind all of these slush fund deals and find out who's involved. The problem, well, I won't say the problem, but the problem for us is it has created a new administrative compliance burden, and it is a bit burdensome for some of us, in that what it says is every basically legal entity, LLCs, corporations, partnerships, trusts, all legal entities with certain exceptions, and I'll touch on that in a second, but need to report to FinCEN their beneficial ownership. So as I'm sure you're aware, there are certain states, for instance, in the United States, Delaware, Wyoming, where there's anonymity behind it. You go and you look it up. Unlike in the state of Illinois, there's really not anonymity. You have to at least disclose who your managers are for an LLC or your officers for a corporation. In those states, there's anonymity. If you go and look them up, there's just who the registered agent is, and that's that. The Corporate Transparency Act at a federal level tries to reduce that anonymity. Now, at least to my knowledge, and this is in its infancy, sort of, it's not as if all of the beneficial ownership information that you have to submit becomes publicly available. That, I'm not saying that, but at least to the government, it is available, readily available, if they need to pursue you for whatever reason. So how does this impact the real estate folks? Well, even at the most base level, most of us form LLCs, maybe some use corporations or partnerships of some form. But let's say that you have somebody, let's take one of our investor clients as an example. They have their parent or base company that operates their business, but for every purchase, they open or form a new LLC, right? Sometimes with all the same investors, sometimes with others, a mix. Sometimes they're series LLCs. Well, for every one of those, you now need to file this beneficial ownership information report. Okay, what does that mean? Well, who has beneficial ownership? It's defined by one of two things. Any person or entity that owns 25% or more of the interests of the company, or, and this is the more fuzzy and more difficult part, any person or entity that exercises substantial control over the company. Well, what does substantial control mean? This is still being boiled out, but it can include serving as an officer, a senior officer of the company, having authority over those senior officers or over the board of directors, having substantial influence over the major decisions of the company, having any other form of substantial control and influence. So that's the legal trap, right? We have to understand that. So take an investment group. Well, a lot of times you'll have silent partners in an LLC, right? You'll have the non-managing members that brought the capital. They'll own more than 25%. You now need to go to those money investors who, it's hard enough getting stuff from them, but you have to tell them now, well, okay, I need all of your vital information, all your personal information, including you're going to need to upload a copy of their ID, whether it's a license or a passport.
And Jim, this is if they own 25% or more?
Right, or exercise substantial control. So here, and this is one of the challenges that we're still trying to work out because we haven't yet seen enforcement, right? We have essentially you have until the end of this year to begin complying, whether you were formed prior to the enactment date of January 1, 2024, or formed in 2024. You've got to comply by the end of this year. So we haven't yet seen how the government is going to interpret all of this. But let's take an example where you have an LLC with 3 members, 2 individuals, and 1 individual that invested through their LLC. So you have 2 people and 1 LLC. They're all the members, but only one of those members is the manager. They're the ones with the experience. They're the ones boots on the ground that are going to run this building, right? Well, with that LLC member, you do have to report them as a beneficial ownership interest if, as is typically the case, the operating agreement reserves certain major decisions to all members, right? You either need unanimous approval from them, or you're going to need those 2 non-managing members to approve, or the percentage is such that that LLC is going to need to approve things. Well, I think that at least sounds like substantial control to me, right? And you can't just run that business without the input of that one. So we're often taking the conservative approach with these filings and saying, with that LLC, we have to report. Now, that LLC may in turn have two trusts as members, right? A husband and wife, or may have the main guy that you're dealing with, but their cousin, whatever. They have trust. You've got to drill all the way down through those and get to the people and report their personal information, all their vital data, get their address, full legal name, address, like I said, ID, all of that has to be uploaded into this system. So the substantial control part, the 25% part is pretty easy to identify. The substantial control, you have to really look at your operating agreement. And moving forward, you know, this may affect how you look at your operating agreement. Certainly, we say, and it's something I haven't even fully put into practice yet, getting folks to include a provision that all members must agree to comply with the CTA. Now, most operating agreements say they have to do everything necessary to comply with the law, and this is the law. But one of the challenges that I hear in talking to folks in the industry is, it can't be that big a deal. What's the problem? Is FinCEN really going to come after every LLC and every corporation out there? There's probably some accuracy to that, but the bigger problem we're seeing right now is, or we're waiting for, is lenders and buyers. If you aren't compliant with the CTA, I think that the major lenders in 2025 are not going to issue financing to you. They're going to make this part of their underwriting process, that you have to be CTA compliant. And so you're going to have to be able to provide them with everything that you provided with, as showing your receipt of filing with CTA. You may have to provide all of that to them. So it's going to have to be orderly, ready to deliver to them, just like you would deliver all of your financial data, all of your personal, financial data, anytime you're trying to get financing from them. And then on the other side, if you're trying to sell a building, your buyer may well want to see that you are CTA compliant, so that there is no risk of any of that liability transferring to you.
Yeah. So what do we have to do? Like, I'm hearing this for the first time. I have an LLC, even if it's just 2 or 3 members, like you mentioned, like you still got to comply. Is there like a specific form? Do you turn to your attorney? Like, just walk through like the next steps here for the investor looking to comply.
So you can do this on your own if you want. You go, the website is like FinCEN /BOI.
We'll link to that in the show notes. We'll get that in the show notes here for everyone.
Yeah, so it's on the FinCEN website, and you just go in, and there's your form. You start to just fill it in. You upload. You can save at some point. It's like one of these standard federal submissions. Like I said, you don't have to go to an attorney. You don't have to go to an accountant. The only thing is, a lot of our clients are turning to us now for this because they're realizing as they get into it, they're not sure whether somebody has substantial control. So if you do it through us, we use a third-party platform to drive it, but we guide you through the interpretation of your operating agreement. We look at your org charts for each of these LLCs that you're in or that you manage, whatever, and help you properly upload.
All right. So we'll link to that in the show notes. I think if listeners have further questions, we'll also link to Jim's contact here, because you're the only person I know talking about this.
I might be nuts, but it worries me. I mean, it worries me just in its scope. It's so many of us have so many, in our case, mostly LLCs that we're involved with. So, and we're now running out of time as we enter this fourth quarter.
Yep.
All right. Awesome.
Good stuff. Mark, are we ready to wrap here?
Ready to wrap?
All right, Jim, I know you listen to this show, so hopefully you got some answers for us on these.
Oh.
All right, Jim, what is your competitive advantage? How have you been able to do this over the last so many decades while others wish they could?
Well, I think honestly, I mean, it's a little cliche, but I think it starts with our culture. Like I said, everything that we do here is about helping, and we enjoy working with people. Um, you know, it's a living, of course, but we listen to our clients. We're responsive, and as a result, that's why I built it into the various practices. From a firm standpoint, I think what sets us apart from a lot of our direct competitors is the diversity and the fact that we do both the transactional and the litigation side of it. We can offer our clients a lot of support, in the acquisition phase. Well, tell me what kind of risk am I looking at if I take this on? I can tell you how this matter would litigate, or I can tell you how this matter would turn out in a, whatever aspect of it. I can tell you how you can, after your acquisition, plan for better management of it, transferring to an LLC, or getting your kids involved if they're in that stage, or whatever it is. So I think that's sort of what is the fundamental difference between us and a lot of our direct competitors.
Yep. All right. What one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
Ooh. Take no shortcuts. And your first time, you need to invest more than you would invest later. You invest in the education by getting good partners. You've got to do this, with others. You can't figure you're going to do it based on YouTube videos alone. There's a lot of great information out there, but if nothing else, before you jump into anything, make sure you've spent the time talking to the folks in the industry, aligning yourself with the right partners, lending agents, property management, the like.
All right, Jim, what do you do for fun?
Outside of this, mostly my time is spent either in CrossFit or traveling.
Good answers for both ways. All right. Give us a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you'd recommend to our listeners.
Book I'm reading right now is The 4 Pillars of Critical Thinking. And then the other one that I've just started is it's one based on a Navy SEALs commencement address. I think it's called Make Your Bed. And I like it. It's very simple. It's just the 6 rules of keeping yourself focused and more efficient and more productive, I should say. Just little things to do to kind of keep moving forward. Comes out of his Navy SEAL training.
All right.
What's up?
Besides yourself, name a valuable resource you could recommend to other Chicago real estate investors.
I'm sure this one has come up a million times, but I can't understate the value of NBOA and its affiliates. As Tom has mentioned, I'm particularly involved with the Northwest Side Building Coalition, NSBC, but all of these affiliates in the NBOA are critical. Right now we're facing a big hurdle with this new Northwest Side housing ordinance that's going into effect tomorrow. But these you mentioned Roman's situation, and NBOA was instrumental with the media relations there. So, and they just have tons of people who have done this from every angle and are willing to help give you guidance.
All right, Jim, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
Well, yeah. Visit our website. It's erwinlawfirm.com. That's ERWIN lawfirm.com. And, see what we do. We pretty much cover all ends of things for our real estate investors in-house. We don't yet do zoning or property tax appeals, but we certainly have folks we can guide people to. But other than that, give me a call. I'm happy to talk. The meter doesn't run until we're starting to work with you. And, I like I said, I love that piece of it. I love just talking through it. I don't get to do as much boots on the ground as you guys do, and it makes me jealous. So I love to hear the stories. I love to to get involved and hear it from that end. But yeah, give us a call. We cover all aspects from residential, commercial, industrial. We're getting a lot into the data center work now. So,
all right, Mark, we got a Chicago fact. Who are we playing for? Who's sponsoring?
All right, we're playing for Connor Rosenthal, and our sponsor today is Renovo Financial, the Eric Workman team. So, Connor, if myself or Jim gets this right, you get $50 gift card brought to you by the Eric Workman team at Renovo.
All right, and no pressure. I would get this one. So I usually don't get to say that to you. You know a lot more than me, but this is, I want music on you here. So our guest today, Jim, you are a Lake Forest University grad, and we haven't talked about that university at all. This folk singer, also an alumni from Lake Forest University. He's best known for writing City of New Orleans, A Dying Cubs Fan's Last Request, and Go Cubs Go. Who is it? And these are your options. Steve Goodman, Roy Orbison, Chris Christopherson, Warren Zevon. Which one of these didn't graduate, but attended Lake Forest University?
Steve Goodman, give me those one more time.
Steve Goodman, Roy Orbison, Chris Christopherson, Warren Zevon.
Gotta be to either A or D.
We can each take a different one. So
okay.
You take one, I take one.
I'll take Steve Goodman.
And then who should I take? Because I never heard any of these names.
No, but I would have gone with the last one, whatever his name.
Warren Zevon. He wrote Lawyers, Guns, and Money, coincidentally, and Werewolves of London. No, the answer is Steve Goodman. You guys got this.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Good.
All right, good guess, Jim, man. That's awesome. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I never even knew Lake Forest had a college until I was actually talking to somebody last week. So it's funny how you hear things like in pairs of like.
Yeah, the only time it ever used to come up was because we were basically on the same campus as the Bears.
Yeah, the Bears training camp.
Right, it's so funny. The guy I was talking to, he's like, that's how we're known. Like, so
yeah. When Casey Urlacher went there, it finally put it on the map a little bit. But
all right, awesome. All right, Jim. Thanks for coming on. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, if you have questions, message us on Instagram, Facebook, Straight Up Chicago Investor Club. We're active in all those places. Or visit straightupchicagoinvestor.com. You go to Ask Mark and Tom. You know, we talk to a dozen or so probably people a week together, whether it be random texts or through social media. So we're always willing to help advise, or more so, we connect people more often than not. So with other valuable resources like people like Jim. So check us out. And then Jim, thank you. Tom, thank you. And listeners, we'll see you next week.
Keep up the great work, guys. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks all.